Hey there and welcome back to another Stranger Things video. And recently, we saw the release of the latest season of Stranger Things with Season 4, Volume 1. And by God, it was a good one. A seriously epic piece of TV, if I do say so myself. And it was a big time return to form for the franchise. Season 3, now I don't think it was bad, but I don't think it quite hit the same highs that the franchise has been known for previously. Like I said, it wasn't bad, the acting was good, the characters were good, music, scripting, dialogue, nothing was overtly bad or dragging down the season. It was just that for me personally, it didn't have that same pizzazz that Season 1 and 2 had, where they went really hard with the horror stuff. Those seasons felt like sci-fi horror with drama thrown in. Season 3 felt more like a drama with some horror elements thrown in. And so to have Season 4 really lean into the horror aspect again was really nice to see. And honestly, even just looking at this from a standalone perspective, this season's just really good. And it does a lot of things right, and really not much wrong. And so, since I want to finish this on a high, I'm going to start off with the negatives before we do anything else. That way we can get them out of the way, and it doesn't seem like I'm complaining too much. Okay, so for the most part, all the different story arcs were fun. They were well paced and they were really interesting. Except for one. I wasn't at all interested in Hopper in the Russian prison. I didn't care when they beat him. I didn't care when they were working the train tracks. I didn't give two shits about his little deal with the Russian guard to try and break out. The story was so disconnected from the story with Vecna and 11 getting her powers back, which were two arcs that were very heavily intertwined. So whenever we had to go back to it, it felt like a chore, like it was harder to engage with. And this was compounded by the fact that there are no real stakes for the story or characters whatsoever. There's no chance in hell Hopper's gonna die here. Or Joyce. I mean, maybe Murray. But even that would be highly doubtful. They all have stories that need to link back with the two main groups in America. They're not gonna die in some remote prison in Kamchatka. And they're unlikely to also learn anything useful in some remote prison in Kamchatka. They're only there to remove them from the story, to make the kids feel like they're in peril, because now they have nobody they can rely on to help them. And previously in earlier seasons, that kind of dynamic was fine because ultimately their storylines were a little bit more congruent. They would tie together more closely. But here, it feels like they're still wrapping up the leftover plot from Season 3. I mean, yeah, maybe Vecna's gonna somehow tie into the Russian plot, but I don't think it's very likely. And then on top of that, I feel like the story for this section went at snail pace. I mean, by the end, they're not even free yet. So that means we still have to endure a fair amount of Russian prison in the second volume, where they probably have to get past the guards and the Russian Demogorgon again. Another story point I didn't really care for was the Steve and Nancy love triangle returning. Ugh. To me, this just felt like a pointless character regression to create tension and drama. Narratively, you know there's no chance she's actually going to get back with Steve of all people. I just feel like they want Steve to so badly have a love interest, and they've realized they've really run out of options for him. It's probably a little late to be introducing anybody new into the story now, and so they figured, why not? And then having all their friends be all, you guys should kiss. I don't know, it just feels pointless. Because you know in the end, Jonathan's gonna turn up and it's all gonna get sorted out. So yeah, that's probably one of the more frustrating elements for me. But the thing that most bothered me, I'd say, was sometimes it would descend into gore porn at certain points. Yes, the first couple of times that they killed someone off like that, it was really effective at being shocking, disgusting, and frightening, and it really made you feel on edge. But after a while, it was like, oh, okay, they're doing the snapped limbs thing again. Oh, yeah, another close-up of somebody's jaw dislocating and their eyes exploding. Lovely. I mean, they did like 4 separate characters, was it? Plus, they replayed the mum's death at least once in 2 separate flashbacks. Like, it doesn't make it any more scary when you get to that stage. And it was actually more frightening when you see it start happening to Max and you're in suspense, wondering if she's actually going to get killed off. That, for me, is the horror. The suspense, the psychological aspect. Like when one reveals who he is and he gives 11 that intense speech. That's far more frightening than overusing a gruesome death scene again and again. But aside from that, there wasn't really anything that stood out to me as being overtly bad or like it was dragging down the season as a whole. Everything else I found it to range from good to great. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into that. For starters, the new characters. They are all good. They're all interesting and they're all charismatic and they add a lot to the show. Eddie, he's just one of my favourite new characters this season. A take on the classic outsider from 80s films, a rebel, an outsider, a kind of loose cannon, dealing drugs, playing D&D. He has terrible grades, plays in a band, all those kind of things. He's charismatic and loud and unpredictable. but underneath it all, he has this inherent kindness to him, like when he was dealing drugs to Chrissy. He went out of his way to be nice to her and put her at ease. Shame she died, honestly. I thought for a moment she might survive. Ugh. But it did kickstart one of my favourite Stranger Things storylines, so guess it could be worse. Sorry, Chrissy. But yeah, from there, the trauma of that completely throws all the rebel bad boy stuff out the window, and he becomes the damsel that needs to be rescued by Dustin and the gang. And I really enjoyed his 180 from the rugged, nerdy outcast to terrified teenager with such a short span of time. And on top of that, it was just nice to have another personality for the characters to bounce off of, one of whom the younger ones were kind of in awe of, and the older ones are more unsure about. And speaking of having someone to bounce off of, Argyle was a great addition. For one, because there was a disturbing lack of stoners in the show, and two, because it actually gave Jonathan a character he can bounce off of. We've seen him be a romantic interest with Nancy, and we've seen him be a big brother with his brother. But those are his closest attachments. We don't really get to see how he behaves with a close friend. And so this really helped to round out his character in a fun way. And in a way that also felt kind of separate from the rest of the story. Like he has a friendship that's solely his and he's alone. And it just helps to make him feel a little bit more three-dimensional and gives him another element to his character beyond boyfriend and devoted brother/son. But I think by far the best new character that made their debut this season is Peter Ballard, aka One, aka Henry Creel, aka Vecna. And for me, he's the best character because we've seen him so many times and we see his influence all over the season, and yet it doesn't all come together until that final reveal, because his personality in each of these different personas is so different. At first, Peter seems to be so kind and friendly towards Eleven. He wants her to succeed, he wants her to thrive. Hell, it even seems like he wants her to escape even if he wouldn't be able to go with her, because he sees in her a kindred spirit, and thus he thinks that she has a great destiny to fulfill. And then when she removes the chip that's suppressing his own powers, well, suddenly the mask slips off and he goes full serial killer, telling her about his grand destiny, about how he murdered his mother and his sister, and how he slaughtered the majority of the people in Hawkins' lab. And the juxtaposition of him as Peter, so kind and friendly, if a little bit unsettling at times, before he snaps and is unhinged Henry Creel, it's a great bit of acting if I'm being honest. Props to that guy. And honestly, that whole sequence really helps that episode become one of the best in the show's history. It was such a good twist and had so many layers. And whilst I will admit that I figured that he'd probably be One, and probably Vecna as well, the connection to Henry Creel completely eluded me. And now it just makes so much sense as to why he lives in that version of the house in the Upside Down, and what's up with the spider legs and all that. And I guess this in turn flows into the storyline, which, like I said, was top notch. Anything to do with Vecna's storyline was just pure gold, and created a really eerie and creepy atmosphere that permeated through each of the various different storylines. Even those that didn't have that much to do with it, except for Hopper in Russia, like I mentioned before. In Hawkins, there was this overwhelming feeling of dread as you follow each of the different planned murder victims, or as they desperately try to unravel the secret of Vecna before Max is brutally murdered. Even down to the pretty cringy side plot of the high school jocks somehow creating a mob through the power of charisma. Seriously, are they going to listen to this high school kid about a satanic cult? All his big speeches, in all honesty, were kind of cringy to me, and it felt so ridiculous that they'd actually succeed in whipping up the people into a frenzy. The town's going to listen to this kid? But anyway, the desperation that the kids were feeling in regards to Max's predicament really ramped up the drama and the tension, and so everybody was on edge. Everybody was freaking out. And it has this somber tone that both draws you in and makes you want to see more. And then across on the West Coast, we see Eleven's story of getting her powers back via returning to Dr. Brenner. And there, we get the whole tragic story of her past in the facility, thinking that she massacred all those kids and orderlies, only for it to be revealed that it was her only friend and ally that did it instead. And that he, in fact, has been orchestrating all the terrible events of the season. And alongside this, Mike and the lads go on a road trip to try and find Eleven and save Hawkins with a very amusing side story where they turn up at Susie's house, and Argyle falls in love with her older sister and gets high in the van with her, whilst the others trick Susie into performing her tech wizardry to help them locate the secret compound where Eleven's located, whilst telling her it's actually to do with a scavenger hunt for a secret video game console for Dustin. And these stories, they just help to balance out the really dark and gruesome storyline in Hawkins, and in Russia. Whereas those first two are more horror mystery and an espionage storyline, Eleven's journey, right from its beginning with her getting bullied and feeling more and more like an outcast, down to her past in the lab and getting her powers back, is much more of a slow burn psychological horror. It's still frightening, but more slowly paced than the Hawkins storyline, and obviously it has less stakes as you know she's not in danger. Yet. And then these are counterbalanced by the stoner road trip comedy that is the trip in the van to visit the Mormons. And this, of course, is interspersed with a good old home invasion by the military and their guard dying in the back of the van. But we can all just brush over that. I mean, the kids did. So yeah, Stranger Things Season 4 is a big time return to form. And I'd argue it's the best season yet, which is surprising as usually these shows do dip in quality the further along you go. But here we are. A great story for the most part, great characters, great length, and very, very bingeable. Here's to hoping Volume 2 is just as good. But with all that being said, these are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the season? You like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.